It started with a silence so sharp it stunned the Privy Council chamber itself. Princess Anne, normally immovable, disciplined, almost militaristic in her loyalty to the crown, rose from her seat without a word and walked straight past senior advisors after learning King Charles III had quietly removed Zara Tindall from a confidential future royal strategy. For those who witnessed it, the moment felt less like a disagreement and more like the beginning of a royal civil war. The atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace had reportedly been tense for weeks, but few understood why. Courtiers whispered about emergency meetings behind sealed doors. Revised briefing documents quietly circulated through royal offices, and unusual restrictions were placed around discussions involving the monarchy's long-term future. Even senior aides were allegedly instructed to speak only through tightly controlled administrative channels. At first, many believed the secrecy revolved around King Charles III's ongoing health concerns and the growing pressure surrounding the future of the crown. But according to palace insiders, the reality was far more explosive. Hidden deep within a revised, streamlined monarchy proposal reportedly presented during a confidential Privy Council briefing was one shocking omission that immediately changed the emotional temperature inside the room. Zara Tindall's name had vanished completely from future ceremonial planning, Commonwealth representation discussions, and long-term royal support structures expected to assist Prince William during the next era of the monarchy. For Princess Anne, the revelation reportedly landed like a betrayal she never anticipated. Those familiar with Anne's decades of service often describe her as the monarchy's ultimate enforcer, a royal figure shaped entirely by duty, discipline, and sacrifice. She had survived scandals, constitutional crises, public criticism, and generational warfare inside the House of Windsor without ever publicly losing control. But insiders now claimed this moment was different because it involved the one person and had quietly protected for years, her daughter. Reports suggest and had long believed Zara represented something the monarchy was beginning to lose: stability without entitlement, loyalty without performance, and public respect earned through discipline rather than royal privilege. Zara's growing popularity among military circles, charitable organizations, and Commonwealth sporting communities allegedly made her an increasingly trusted figure behind palace walls. Yet despite that loyalty, despite years spent supporting royal initiatives without demanding titles or elevated status, her future role had reportedly been erased without warning. The silence inside the chamber allegedly became unbearable. Several advisors attempted to continue presenting briefing material, but according to whispers emerging from palace administrative circles, and had already stopped listening. Witnesses reportedly noticed her expression change almost instantly. The Princess Royal, normally unreadable even during moments of political crisis, appeared visibly shaken. One palace insider later described the room as frozen, claiming even veteran courtiers seemed uncertain whether they were witnessing a routine disagreement or the collapse of something far more dangerous. Sources suggest and asked only one question before standing from her chair. No shouting, no theatrical confrontation, just a cold, devastating silence that reportedly unsettled everyone present far more than anger ever could. As Anne walked out of the chamber, senior aides allegedly rushed behind her in an attempt to calm the situation before it escalated further. Some reportedly insisted the restructuring plan was still under review. Others attempted to frame Zara's exclusion as a technical adjustment connected to Charles's vision of a reduced monarchy. But palace insiders whisper that Anne no longer believed those explanations. By then, another suspicion had reportedly begun spreading through royal corridors, that the decision may not have originated entirely from Charles himself. Various interpretations of the meeting suggest certain members of Queen Camilla's private circle had spent months quietly advocating for a tighter royal structure centered around figures they considered strategically useful for the monarchy's future. And if those whispers were true, then Zara's removal was not simply administrative. It was political. What made the situation even more explosive was the timing. Reports claim Prince William himself had only been informed of the changes hours before the meeting began, leaving even the future king reportedly blindsided by the scale of the revisions. Sources close to Kensington Palace suggest William had long viewed Zara as an important stabilizing figure within the wider royal structure, particularly during a period when public trust in the monarchy remained increasingly fragile. By nightfall, insiders described Buckingham Palace as icy. Meetings ended abruptly. Staff conversations reportedly stopped whenever senior royals entered corridors. Even long-time palace employees began whispering that something irreversible may have just happened behind those closed Privy Council doors. For months, rumors had circled through Buckingham Palace corridors about a secret restructuring plan hidden inside briefing folders marked for only the highest-ranking royals. Most dismissed the whispers as routine constitutional housekeeping until and discovered what had truly been rewritten behind closed doors. According to palace insiders, discussions surrounding the future structure of the royal family had quietly intensified during the early stages of King Charles III's illness. What initially appeared to be ordinary succession planning reportedly evolved into something far more controlled, far more political, and far more dangerous for those who had spent decades protecting the institution from within. Senior aides allegedly began referring to the proposal as a streamlined transition framework, a long-term strategy designed to secure the monarchy during a period of uncertainty. But behind the polished language and official explanations, whispers of an entirely different agenda reportedly started circulating among royal staff. Sources close to palace administrative offices claimed Charles had become increasingly focused on creating what advisors privately described as a tighter core royal command. The argument, at least publicly, centered around efficiency. Fewer senior royals, fewer moving parts, fewer risks during a time when the monarchy faced enormous public scrutiny. Yet insiders now suggest the restructuring extended beyond practical concerns. Various interpretations of the internal discussions describe a growing effort to centralize influence around a smaller group of carefully selected figures while quietly reducing the visibility of others once considered essential to the crown's future. And hidden within those revisions, according to palace whispers, was the gradual removal of Princess Anne's wider influence from the next royal era. That was what made Zara Tindall's disappearance from the strategy so devastating for Anne. Because according to those familiar with royal operations, Zara had never been viewed internally as a decorative figure or symbolic royal extra. Despite holding no formal title, she reportedly earned deep respect among military charities, equestrian organizations, and Commonwealth sporting institutions through years of disciplined public work. Palace insiders claim William and Catherine increasingly trusted Zara's calm presence during moments of institutional instability, particularly as tensions surrounding Harry and Meghan continued casting long shadows across the monarchy. Reports even suggest Zara had quietly become part of informal future planning conversations connected to William's eventual reign, particularly in areas involving veteran support programs and Commonwealth outreach initiatives where public trust remained fragile. For Anne, that trust reportedly mattered deeply. Sources whisper that over the years, the Princess Royal privately guided Zara through the unwritten realities of royal survival, not through privilege but through endurance. And allegedly believed the monarchy's future depended less on celebrity and more on reliability, sacrifice, and emotional discipline. Insiders claim she saw in Zara many of the same qualities Queen Elizabeth II once valued above all else: resilience without complaint and loyalty without public performance. That is why the restructuring documents struck such a nerve. Because from Anne's perspective, this was not simply an adjustment to ceremonial planning. It felt like the deliberate dismantling of an entire philosophy the old guard had spent decades protecting. The deeper palace staff examined the revisions, the more troubling the internal dynamics reportedly appeared. According to several royal commentators and administrative sources, new briefing drafts allegedly prioritized figures connected more closely to Queen Camilla's private advisory network while reducing the strategic relevance of Anne's long-standing alliances. Some insiders even claimed there were growing discussions about permanently sidelining so-called non-working royals from any meaningful institutional role moving forward, regardless of their public popularity or historic loyalty to the crown. What made matters worse was the extraordinary secrecy surrounding the documents themselves. Palace officials reportedly restricted circulation of the revised plans to an unusually small number of senior personnel, fueling suspicion that even members of the family were being deliberately excluded from the full picture until decisions had already been finalized. By then, Anne's frustration was no longer isolated. Reports suggest concern had started spreading quietly through other parts of the royal household as well. Some feared the monarchy was becoming less about continuity and more about internal consolidation. Others worried that loyalty built over decades was suddenly being discarded in favor of political convenience during one of the most unstable periods of Charles's reign. And as whispers of divided factions deepened behind palace walls, the emotional fracture inside the House of Windsor reportedly became impossible to hide any longer. Princess Anne had tolerated scandals, betrayals, media attacks, and decades of royal compromises without publicly cracking. But insiders whisper that removing Zara crossed a line no monarch had crossed before. Because this time the attack was not political. It was personal. For most of her life inside the House of Windsor, Anne had reportedly accepted one brutal truth above all others: Duty came before emotion, before comfort, before pride. She endured the collapse of royal marriages, public criticism aimed at the family, generational rebellion, and the suffocating pressure of protecting an institution constantly balancing tradition against survival. Through every scandal that threatened Buckingham Palace, and remained the figure courtiers depended on when emotions needed to be removed from the equation. Which is why insiders now insist the silence that followed Zara's exclusion frightened the palace more than any shouting ever could. Because beneath Anne's famously controlled exterior, Zara Tindall was never simply another member of the extended royal family. According to those familiar with Anne's private world, Zara represented something far deeper, perhaps the greatest personal success of Anne's entire life. While other royal relationships fractured under pressure, Zara reportedly became the one person and trusted without reservation. There were no palace games between them, no desperate hunger for status, no obsession with titles or celebrity. Sources close to royal circles claim and admired the fact that Zara built respect through work, discipline, and resilience rather than royal privilege. In many ways, insiders whisper that Anne saw her daughter as proof the monarchy could still produce figures grounded enough to survive modern public scrutiny without becoming consumed by it. That belief allegedly intensified after Queen Elizabeth II's death. Palace insiders suggest and increasingly feared the monarchy was drifting away from the principles her mother spent 70 years defending. Reports claiming and quietly viewed Zara as part of the institution's emotional future, a stabilizing presence capable of supporting William and Catherine during the turbulent years ahead. While Zara carried no official royal rank, whispers inside Buckingham Palace reportedly described her as an unofficial bridge between the old guard and the monarchy's next generation. Her popularity among military communities, sporting organizations, and charitable networks allegedly strengthened Anne's confidence that loyalty and competence could still matter more than palace politics. Which is precisely why her sudden removal felt too and less like restructuring and more like erasure. By then, tensions inside the royal household had reportedly been simmering for years. Various interpretations of palace dynamics suggest Anne and Camilla rarely viewed the monarchy through the same lens after Elizabeth II passed away, and allegedly prioritized institutional discipline, continuity, and service above personal influence, while whispers from palace insiders increasingly connected Camilla's inner circle to efforts aimed at consolidating power around a smaller and more politically manageable royal structure. Reports even claim and privately worried that loyalty built over decades was slowly being replaced by strategic favoritism. So when Zara's role vanished from the revised royal plans, insiders say and immediately interpreted it as something deliberate, not accidental, not procedural, but deliberate humiliation. Witnesses present during the Privy Council meeting reportedly noticed the emotional shift instantly. One palace source later described Anne's face as ashen, claiming she appeared physically stunned by what she had just read. Another insider whispered that even veteran courtiers avoided making eye contact as the realization spread across the room. For a brief moment, according to reports, the carefully rehearsed atmosphere of royal control completely collapsed. Some advisors attempted to continue discussing constitutional logistics, but and allegedly no longer cared about the presentation. Years of restraint, sacrifice, and silence had reportedly collided with something far more painful than palace politics: betrayal from within her own family. Then came the moment that still echoes through palace whispers. No dramatic speech, no public confrontation, just cold disbelief hardening into something almost impossible to contain. Courtiers reportedly froze as she walked toward the chamber doors before discussions had even concluded. Sources claim King Charles attempted to stop her, quietly calling after his sister as aides scrambled to contain the situation before staff beyond the room realized what was unfolding. But according to insiders, Anne never turned around. As Princess Anne withdrew further into silence after the Privy Council confrontation, a far more dangerous conversation reportedly began unfolding behind palace walls. According to whispers circulating through royal administrative circles, Anne no longer believed the restructuring crisis could be explained by King Charles's illness, exhaustion, or even his long-discussed vision of a reduced monarchy. Instead, insiders claim her attention had shifted toward something far more politically explosive: the growing influence of competing palace factions operating quietly beneath the surface of the crown itself. And at the center of those whispers stood Queen Camilla's increasingly powerful private network. For years, reports surrounding Camilla's role inside the monarchy remained carefully managed through controlled public appearances and disciplined palace messaging. But following Queen Elizabeth II's death, insiders claimed the balance of influence inside Buckingham Palace began changing rapidly. Various interpretations of internal royal dynamics suggest Camilla's advisors increasingly pushed for a smaller monarchy built around a tightly controlled inner structure, loyal to Charles and protective of Camilla's long-term position within royal history. Publicly, the argument centered around modernization and efficiency. Privately, however, palace veterans allegedly feared something else was happening entirely. They worried certain figures within the royal household were quietly reshaping the future of the monarchy around strategic alliances rather than institutional continuity. That was where Zara allegedly became a problem. According to several insiders, Zara's rising popularity inside military circles, sporting communities, and Commonwealth organizations had started attracting serious attention behind palace walls. Unlike traditional working royals, Zara carried none of the public fatigue surrounding formal titles or taxpayer criticism. She represented a version of royal relevance that felt accessible, stable, and unusually true. Stead during a period of growing instability inside the family. Reports even suggest younger palace staff increasingly viewed her as a natural future support figure beside William and Catherine because she projected reliability without political controversy. And while that popularity strengthened and standing within the monarchy, some insiders whisper it may have unsettled advisors aligned more closely with Camilla's vision for the crown's future hierarchy. At the same time, Anne's own influence reportedly continued expanding behind the scenes. Palace administrative sources claim William increasingly leaned on and during private succession discussions as Charles's health struggles intensified. Various interpretations of royal strategy meetings describe and becoming one of the future king's most trusted institutional voices, particularly regarding military tradition, Commonwealth relationships, and internal discipline within the House of Windsor. That growing alliance between William and allegedly created unease among certain senior advisors who feared the emergence of a powerful royal bloc capable of limiting alternative influences around the throne. By then, insiders say Buckingham Palace had quietly divided into competing camps, those loyal to the old guard built around Anne's philosophy of duty above politics, and those favoring a more centralized structure increasingly connected to Camilla's private network. Whispers surrounding Zara's exclusion only deepened after details from the restructuring documents began leaking internally. Several sources claim her removal was described behind closed doors as strategic simplification, language that reportedly infuriated Anne's supporters because it reduced years of loyalty and public service to little more than a bureaucratic inconvenience. Palace staff allegedly began questioning why figures with strong public support were being quietly pushed aside while less visible but politically connected individuals retained privileged access to future royal planning discussions. What made the crisis even more volatile was Prince William's reported reaction once he realized how much information had been withheld from him. According to insiders close to Kensington Palace, William was furious not only about Zara's removal, but about the secrecy surrounding the entire process. Sources whispered that he viewed the situation as a dangerous breakdown of trust during one of the monarchy's most fragile periods in decades. Some even claimed William privately questioned why discussions involving the future structure of his eventual reign had occurred without his full involvement. By then, the emotional fracture inside Buckingham Palace was allegedly becoming impossible to contain. Staff conversations reportedly turned tense. Meetings became guarded. And as suspicion spread deeper through royal corridors, one reality reportedly terrified the old guard more than anything else. If Zara could disappear from the monarchy's future so suddenly, then no alliance inside the House of Windsor was truly secure anymore. The moment Anne walked out of that chamber, the balance of power inside the House of Windsor reportedly shifted. According to palace whispers, Prince William immediately understood the danger. By the end of that night, Buckingham Palace was no longer operating like a united institution. Reports suggest private meetings were suddenly rescheduled behind closed doors, senior aides stopped sharing information across departments, and longtime staff members began quietly aligning themselves with competing royal camps. But while confusion spread through palace corridors, insiders claim Prince William moved quickly and with unusual precision. According to sources close to Kensington Palace, William allegedly requested an emergency private meeting with Princess and only hours after the disastrous Privy Council session ended. No formal advisors, no communication staff, just two senior royals reportedly sitting together behind sealed doors while the monarchy around them drifted deeper into internal crisis. Those familiar with the conversation claimed the atmosphere was far more emotional than either royal would normally allow in public. And, still devastated by Zara's exclusion, reportedly viewed the restructuring plan as the beginning of a dangerous shift away from the principles Queen Elizabeth II spent her entire reign defending. William, meanwhile, allegedly understood something equally alarming. The monarchy's future was no longer being shaped purely through duty or continuity, but increasingly through palace factional politics that threatened the stability of the institution itself. Sources whisper that the discussion quickly evolved beyond Zara. What began as outrage over one decision reportedly turned into a much larger fear that invisible alliances inside Buckingham Palace were quietly repositioning the monarchy's future around influence rather than trust. At the center of those concerns stood the late Queen's legacy. According to insiders, William and allegedly spent hours discussing what Queen Elizabeth II would have wanted during a moment of such instability. Reports suggest and believed her mother intentionally kept reliable figures close to the institution regardless of titles because continuity.